Hello and welcome to etbfsi.com. My name is Amol Dethe and I'm in conversation with Mr. Rajnish Kumar, the former chairman of State Bank of India. Mr. Kumar, welcome to this discussion.
Thank you, Mo.
So glad to have you here, and there are many, thoughts or maybe different topics that I have to discuss with you. To begin with, I will take the first question is specifically about the reality. Every industry, every banker, every CEO is trying to map the reality and worried about how this reality is going to be because we are in the new normal world. We do not know where is the demand, where is the supply. So, in a banker's perspective, if you could give me a sense on how the bankers are mapping the reality, point number one, and what is that you see specifically on the demand side right now?
Right. So, the comparison would obviously be that how was the situation in 2021 when the first wave of COVID came, and how is the situation? So in 2021, what happened was that there was a prolonged lockdown, and it was a nationwide lockdown, and it was very stringent. This time, the key difference is that there is lockdown practically. I think 70 to 80% of the country would be in this some form of lockdown or restrictions, but severity is not as much. Trains are running, your flights are operational. People can still move around. So it's not that there is no disruption to the supply chains. There is disruption, and that is bound to happen. Even if one state is under lockdown in today's time, it can disrupt the supply chains. So from the banker's point of view, if I look at it segment to segment, if you look at large corporates and if you look at the earnings of the large corporates, I think they have been able to face the situation pretty well. And there is no visible stress as of now. And some of the sectors, in fact, showed a very improved performance, like even your steel, your cement, all these sectors, your IT industry was largely unimpacted. So many segments which remain unimpacted. Auto is one sector which was impacted last year and which is also being impacted now, both on the demand side as well as the supply chain constraints. Aviation, tourism, these have been very badly impacted. Organized retail, it has been very badly impacted. Agriculture last year went unscathed. This year, situation may be much more difficult, not on the agriculture production front, but overall the rural economy, which was not as much impacted last year. MSMEs unfortunately continue to be very vulnerable, and they would again be that would be one segment which is one of the most vulnerable segment. And then, of course, there has been huge employment loss, both in urban and rural areas. And 2022 and 2021, the key difference would be that last year we had many measures like, say, liquidity support from Reserve Bank of India and many proactive steps, and including moratorium. So this time liquidity support continues, but the benefit of moratorium is not there and is unlikely to be. Restructuring, yes, some dispensation has been given by the regulators. So my assessment of the situation is that on the corporates, maybe this year also, there may not be too much of concern. MSME and retail or lending for the personal loans. So these are the sectors where you may see elevated NPLs and the credit growth for the banks. That has been a major area of concern. Last year also the credit growth was almost was 5.5%. And this year also it seems that there may not be a higher credit growth. So poor credit offtake is really, in my view, a matter of concern for the banks. The hope, which is now coming out, that the number of cases have started coming down very sharply. And if all goes well, and with the kind of numbers which are being seen, so maybe within June, at least the second wave would have been over. And as the pace of vaccination picks up, so we can see a good economic recovery again from the third quarter onwards. And last year, the recovery happened in the fourth quarter. This year, if we will need some luck, this country also needs some good luck in terms of that the third wave doesn't strike, or we are able to take steps to manage it much better than what happened in COVID-2 or the second wave. And then probably like in the second half, we can see much better economic performance, and the economic recovery can come.
Okay. So, sir, last year when we went into the lockdown, the government came with a big package of 20 lakh crore. They also offered a different scheme called ECLGC with 3 lakh crore, and also extending support. RBI also extended 50,000 crore very recently. My question to you is, are these initiatives of the government and RBI actually helping banks and overall economy to generate the demand?
Last year, if you look at the package, and this was most of the analysts, they had commented that the fiscal component was low. It was more on the monetary side, and the action was mostly from RBI. The government came out with one scheme which became very successful, which was the guarantee scheme, and which has again been extended, and a few modifications have been done. This time I feel that from RBI's side, whatever they did last year, so that will be continuation of those policies. They can maintain easy monetary conditions. There will be enough liquidity in the system. RBI is making every effort to keep the interest rates low. But the general belief is that these monetary efforts may not be sufficient and may not be able to do the heavy lifting which is required. Right now, the priority is to revive the demand and the consumer confidence. And for that, I think the action may have to come from the government. RBI will continue to do its job. I'm very sure about it. But the fiscal measures may be required, and the need for reviving the consumption demand so that we can just reboot the economy, that is very much needed, given all the constraints which the central government finances are facing. So the headroom available to the government also is not unlimited. But this is an unusual situation, so some maybe unusual steps would require to be taken.
Right, sir. But, sir, with your great experience, since you mentioned about the demand generation or the consumption, whenever I'm reading reports from any economists, they also talk about the government should generate the demand and government should take initiatives to boost the consumption. If you allow me to ask you, could you tell me maybe 3-4 points or key highlights? What should government do to boost the consumption? What should government do, to generate the demand apart from what they already did, announcing these packages or the fiscal support?
So I will just take one example that how did it. You take example of Maharashtra,
right,
and they brought down stamp duty from 6% to 2%, and the kind of business it generated till March, it was phenomenal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So this one example itself shows that certain steps like this, they can help in boosting the demand. And everybody took advantage of that situation, and there was unprecedented sales. And the liquidity position of the real estate developers in Maharashtra, it improved. So every time, it's not that the central government alone has to do everything. Even at the state government level, actions of these kinds, they can give boost to the demand. So people have to be encouraged to spend money. And that comes in whatever form you give incentive, lower the tax, or whatever you do. That suppose I buy a car, and if there is an incentive, so many people who are waiting, they may prepone their decision and buy a car.
Right.
So it's not that even last year, you see, One example was where government encouraged people to travel,
Yeah.
and government employees their LTC, they get certain incentives. So many times, even if these steps are small, but they can bring back consumer difference and encourage people to spend. This is the time where most of the people in the country, look, there is a fear, and nobody would like to spend money. Nobody knows that what kind of expenditure on the health may have to be done. So in such a circumstances, there would generally be reluctance to go out and spend. And any incentive would be welcome to do that. And already I've given you a very live example of what can be done, and the results are very much visible, and all the numbers are there to prove that point.
Okay, noted your point. So let me shift my focus to specifically IBC and Bad Bank. Under your reign, in fact, there were many accounts that you handled, went to NCLT. Few cases were resolved as well. In fact, many cases, the top cases were there. But when I speak to the heads of the ARCs or even the experts specifically in this segment, what I learn is, they somehow are blaming the whole liquidation game. And in fact, there are comments by, some experts that liquidation has become a big scam. So, because the idea of the IBC was to push the resolution, but the cases of liquidation are much more higher than the resolution. So, and banks are taking more haircut here. So, what is your view here? Do you think that the resolution is far more lesser than the liquidation, and the banks or the whole ecosystem should focus more on the resolution than the liquidation?
The whole purpose of IBC was to preserve the value of the enterprise. And there are three reasons why we are in this situation. One is many of the cases were old. Resolution can happen only when there is an early action. That is one. It's like a normal human being. If you take action or take somebody to the hospital only when somebody is about to die, then it doesn't work. But early detection, early action, it works. Same goes for the enterprise. So if people continue to delay, whether promoters or lenders, then the revival or resolution becomes very difficult. And in whatever statistics we are seeing, many of the cases were very old cases. So there was no chance of their revival or resolution. Second is, unfortunately, the weakest link in the whole IBC process is not the law, but the execution. Even today, I read in the newspaper that there are 63 vacancies, half of them are lying vacant, and many more members on NCLT benches, they are about to retire. So how does the system deliver? We have thousands of cases. So we are again in a similar situation where the cases keep on piling up, and the resolution process cannot function like this. You have to take quick decisions, immediate decisions. It is a patient in ICU, and you can't leave the patient unattended for months. There are cases where resolution plan has been approved or voted on by COC, but the NCLT decisions are not coming. It is a frustrating experience for the lenders. It is a frustrating experience for the resolution applicants. So the only way, I don't see any flaw in the law per se, because a lot of amendments were carried out in the last 5 years. The Supreme Court made many far-reaching pronouncements which set the law, I would say, law in order. And there is no, it's always a continuous process. But the execution remains the weakest link. That happened in DRT. That is the normal judicial process delays, and the same thing we are experiencing in NCLT. And this is really an unfortunate situation. But for bankers, lenders also, there is no other way. If you go to DRT, enforce your security, it's again a 7, 8, 10-year process. So the best way again to me is that, and that is what bankers all the time do, is that if you can resolve even without going through NCLT process, So please resolve it. Or if you can do a one-time settlement, please do it. You may get better recovery through that process, but in certain cases, there is no way out excepting to go to NCLT and then accept whatever is the fee.
So considering the NCLT experience and specifically what IBC has done, how bullish are you specifically on the framework of bad bank? Because now bankers are looking at bad bank as one of the interesting or far more optimistic mechanism for the recovery. Do you also feel so? If yes, why?
So the rationale behind bad bank, there are two, three things. One is that for there is a lot of fragmentation, like any high value loan, non-performing loan. So there will be 15, 20 lenders and the decision making process becomes very difficult. So the idea is to aggregate, consolidate. Second is the decision making becomes much more professional. Because imagine that in any case, 15 banks or 20 banks handling it, and each bank taking a different view. And here, if there's a professional team, and which takes a view and who is incentivize people, and their job is to maximize or early resolve the distress asset. To that extent, there is a need for this bank. The other advantage is that none of the existing ARC has the capability to consolidate or aggregate a high value loan.
Right.
There is a limitation. So all these, whatever deficiencies or problems in the existing system, they get addressed. But when it comes to resolution, after the asset has been aggregated, to the extent the roadblocks are there, as far as the legal process is concerned, so we will not be, neither be worse off nor better, because that would be the process would remain the same. From buyer's perspective, the advantage is that they will be dealing only with one institution rather than with different institutions. So even the resolution outside the legal process may become faster. So there are advantages, but if we are looking at that, any miracles would happen, and till such time there is no improvement on the NCLT front, then you will be bogged down with the same limitations and same process and same things.
Okay, so since we are discussing about stressed asset, let me take this question specifically about one particular account which had a big chunk with SBI, specifically about the Kingfisher. Mr. Malia has been tweeting a lot specifically about giving a resolution or doing a restructuring of loan or giving an offer or something like that. Is it tough for banks now to go back and recover that money from him in terms of whatever the offer he's making? What are the loopholes? What are the legal challenges in terms of handling that account now?
No, there are no legal challenges. One is, like, I can say that till such time I was chairman, we never had any communication received from Vijay Mallya about any offer to sell. Right. So it was all in the press, media, statements. This is what I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Second is that lenders have security, and there were issues with ED attaching, and bankers had a DRT order in their favor for enforcement of security. So bankers, in any case, irrespective of what Vijay Mallya does, they are in a position to recover that money through enforcement of security. And that security is very good, valuable by way of pledge of shares of UBL.
Right.
And just you would have read 3-4 days back, I think the PMLA court has cleared sale of those assets. So in Vijay Mallya's case, whatever be the narrative, whatever mistakes he has committed, but from lenders' point of view, their recovery would be better than any other. Many other, not any other, many other NPLs and distress. Recovery percentage in this case would be higher, provided we are able to, or lenders are able to, enforce the security.
Okay, quite interesting. I'm glad to know that. So one or two important points specifically about the SBI. Being the largest bank, we have seen under your reign also, expanded a lot, and SBI YONO is one of the great example. I still remember in our last conversation, you said that the SBI YONO value is around 30 to 40 billion dollars. Do you think by any chance SBI should look at it to encash that value going ahead, considering a lot of fintechs and startups are now trying to encash whatever the value they have been building in last couple of years?
SBI in any case will take advantage of that position, right? Either it will be reflected in the value of SBI, and people have started recognizing that SBI is a very underpriced stock. Probably they were waiting that first let me exit, and after that they will start giving a value to SBI stock. So this was always my grouse that SBI is not being properly valued, and even today I believe that it's much more valuable than what is being reflected in its value. And monetizing it by hiving it forward, these are all like complex issues, and definitely there is a thought process, I'm of course not aware what is the latest thinking, but the experience is that the subsidiaries of the bank, they are more valuable or are valued more than the parent bank. So if we go by that analogy, and if there are no major technical roadblocks, then it is possible to hive off YONO platform, offer it through it, offer banking as a service, and get a good value, and definitely it will be profitable from day one. And the value which I am talking about, it is not in thin air.
Okay, noted that point. But sir, one of the also interesting thing that we have seen, and obviously that is not usual, specifically in considering the PSP's history, is SBI has been actually being very active in the digital innovation and trying different things. Not only just SBI, but I think I had heard it from you, and now I heard from the current chairman as well. They are very much interested in the NUE kind of the format which RBI is thinking of. Where do you see SBI specifically next maybe 3 to 5 years with all these digital entities that you have created and the digital innovation that has got a big boost in India?
Okay. I am very clear about one thing, that any business, forget even about SBI or banking, who do not have the technology at its core as a strategy to either service its customer, to expand its reach, to expand its business, or to derive the cost efficiencies. So that business has no future. And I'm happy that State Bank of India, it always has technology to its core. And it is not today during my time or my predecessor's time or successor's time. The State Bank has always been in the forefront of the technology. We were one of the earliest institutions to make use of the mainframe computers at that time in mid-60s for back office function. The only, I would say, the gap which occurred was that we were late in bringing the technology at the front end for servicing the customers.
Right.
So at the back end, the bank was strong and using technology, but somehow it ignored the potential of the technology for serving the customers, and which has now got corrected. And with its distribution, reach, presence, customer base, so the benefits are huge. And the banking in 5 or 10 years is going to change beyond imagination. We are already talking about open banking.
Right.
We are seeing a lot of fintech players coming in, serving any. So the large legacy bank also, they don't have a choice but to think and act like a technology company. And that is what is happening, but it is happening maybe at a different pace in different banks. But as I said, that SBI has some natural advantages, and even the physical presence, that itself is a huge advantage. Such a large customer base of 480 million customers, that is a huge advantage. And the resources which SBI can deploy, that is another huge advantage with the State Bank of India. Plus, you need people who believe in technology and have the vision to push it, and then you have the winning formula.
And one more point specifically on the privatization. Again, this also, got a lot of attentions. There are few PSUs also said that this should not happen, and there are obviously bank employees are also against it. So, what is your assessment specifically about the privatization of two PSPs, and what is it the rationale that you see behind government's, privatization, taking decision of privatizing these two banks?
Again, there are a couple of issues. One issue is that given the finances of the government of India, how long they can continue to capitalize the banks. That is one major issue. And second is, in any case, it is now the government's policy that they will not have any business in non-strategic sectors, and in strategic sectors not more than 4 entities. So that is the stated policy, and that applies to the banking, which is a strategic sector. Now, there can be debate around that whether the private banks, they perform better or they are more risky. So again, there is not an easy answer to this, because we have seen many failures in the private sector banks also. And it's not a panacea for everything, but definitely if the governance can be improved at public sector banks also. Same objective, if the objective is one issue is around capitalization and government's capacity to capitalize it. Second is about improving the governance in the banks, which I believe that even if the government owns and is a majority owner, nothing prevents it from giving operational freedom to the banks and achieve the same objective. So I think it is more to do with the strategic intent of the government, that how many public sector entities they want to have, and the limitations as far as the provision of capital is concerned. But if it was the issue around governance, I believe that it can be easily achieved. If one day government said and decides that your board managed like any other private sector bank, and RBI would be the sole controller and regulator. So if that is done, you can achieve similar results.
And lastly, one question specifically about the digital or the tech side of the banking. In the last couple of years, not only the banks have been partnering with the fintechs, but the big techs are also kind of coming into this space and dominating this space. Do you think that going ahead, maybe central bank should also look at big techs and fintechs far more aggressively? Because somewhere the global regulators are worried about the kinds of transactions which these big techs are going to do. In fact, they're also worried that the kinds of customer segment which the big techs have, even if they regulate it, they won't be control it. So do you see some challenges there, big tech operating in banking and finance space specifically, and there should be a regulatory perspective as well, because they are partnering with all the banks and the financial institutions, and in fact the transactions of the UPI and all those fronts are far more higher than even the routine transaction which happens at the bank.
There is always a need for some sort of regulation, but regulation has to be done in such a way that it does not kill innovation.
Right.
So till such time we can meet that criteria that yes, an oversight, regulation, supervision, so that the one is of course the safety of the overall system. Second is how any institution deals with the customers. So there has to be some regulatory mechanism for that. And if big tech comes, obviously, which to do any business which is akin to banking, so obviously then the regulation will set it. But as I said, that regulation should be not killing the innovation.
Okay, I'm done with all my important questions. Just before I wrap up, one soft question. You have spent more than 4 decades in the banking industry. I'm sure you will have different assignments now. Maybe whole industry will come to you and give you a different aspects. But what is that one important thing that you are missing now since you are relaxing in the lockdown?
Not really, because for 40 years it was a very active life, right? And with God's grace, if you are keeping good physical and mental health, then after some time you feel like going back to action. Okay. But otherwise, there's a lot to do, and the things which one cannot do when one is sitting in an executive position and running a bank, like State Bank of India. So that all that catching up has been done. But once that catching up has been done, and after that again, you feel like that what we done. But COVID-19 again, this COVID also has had impact on many things which I had planned to do.
All right, sir. Noted all your points, and great talking to you. It was nice to listen to you. Thank you so much for talking to etbfsi.com and sharing your views. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Amol. Thank you very much.